What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Soul Surplus Podcast. This is episode 8. I'm your host, Wes Pendleton, along with my co-host, John Smythe. Smythe, how are you, my dude?
Really good, man. It was a good summer.
It was a great summer. You know what's really weird? We took some time off, in essence, to take a break, but not to take a break from work. If anything, I think we actually worked a bit harder this summer than we worked the whole year, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
Had a whole lot going on.
Yeah, definitely. I know we definitely upped our output as far as, the products that we're putting out. At times, two packs a week?
Yeah, we're trying to diversify and build up our own exclusive library because we outsource to other platforms for our main stuff, but between doing exclusive stuff for sounds.com and then also building up our exclusive library, we've been pretty busy, man.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, so a lot was going on. We had some pretty big projects that we had to knock out. I was on full-time dad duty as well, and so we basically had to put some things to the side to regroup, but it's the fall now. Things are kind of back to normal. I think we're in a pretty good groove as a company right now. If you guys didn't know, we brought on a new employee, our friend Zari. He's in charge of all digital media, and we're about to actually bring on some interns here in the fall as well to help us ease some of the workload, and maybe even to try some brand new projects outside of the realm of just composition packs.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see the way that all the other kinds of media that we do interacts with the product that we're already offering,
Yeah. We actually we toured what will probably be our main hub as far as an office yesterday. It's crazy because we've been talking about that for months, and John and I have been talking about it for probably like a year. But it just came down to timing, and then also just making sure that we actually found a place that made sense for us to kind of lay down our roots. You know what I mean? I think it's good for us to share with the folks who support us, like this is what happens, when you support a brand. It allows for growth. It allows us to take what we're doing that much further, taking the next step. And it's just, this is just going to allow us to be way more efficient, especially with, with media endeavors. We're going to have an official podcast station, which will double as a video station as well. We're going to be doing a lot, man. I'm not going to, spill all the beans, but it's going to be great. So we still have our satellite studios, your studio, and also the house studio where John, Joel, and Elvin work out of. But from an admin standpoint and from a media standpoint, that is going to be our main offices, man. So it's going to be probably like 3 to 4 of us working out of that place to begin. And you never know, man, that the spot is big enough that, we could end up having, 7 or 8 people working in there comfortably. It's that big.
Yeah. It would be pretty cool to have sort of like a College Humor kind of atmosphere in there, like a big open space.
Yep.
Where everybody can, collaborate. I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, me too, man. And I was even thinking like, it'd be dope to get like a ping pong table in there. Like it's big enough. Man. It's big enough like to have all that. That's the crazy part, So maybe have like a game station, so when we need to take some breaks, we have something to do. Cause we do get a lot of work done in a week, man. People would be surprised, just how much we get done. The team this is probably just the best team that I've been able to be a part of. Everybody fits in, everybody does, what they're best at. And it's just great to see us grow, man.
Yeah. I will say one thing you touched on just a few seconds ago, being a part of a startup like this, I don't think it can go understated that, there's really no LeBron player,
Right.
Like we need each other, and we all need the people who buy our product
exactly
faithfully, Yeah. It's pretty amazing to watch.
Yeah,
It's cool.
there's definitely no superstars in this. We are more like the Spurs. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Obviously, you have some key players, yourself, Joel, and John, but then you need, glue guys like, Zari and then like some of these interns that we're going to be bringing on, those guys are going to be really, really big glue guys to allow, our stars in essence to not have to worry about some of the little small mundane things that can kind of get in the way of creativity.
Right.
Yeah, man. So just want to say thanks to everybody for supporting us so far. We are really excited to get back into producing podcast episodes on a weekly basis. And so this week we are covering compression, really big topic of discussion, and looking forward to breaking some of this down, Smythe.
Yeah. Pretty controversial in the audio engineering world. Everyone has a different way they use it. Everyone has a different opinion on it. There's some people who say, you shouldn't use too much. There's some people who use a lot of it and get great results. So
right.
It'll be interesting to go through this topic.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it. So, just for the listeners, give a breakdown of what exactly is compression, and then also differentiate the difference between compression and limiting, because there are quite a few people that think that they are one and the same when they actually aren't.
So I would define compression as simply just attenuation. So when you have a signal running through a compressor, whether it's a piece of hardware or whether it is a plug-in, you have a signal at a certain level, and when it hits a certain threshold, the compressor then attenuates, which just means it lowers the volume.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like you have someone on the volume knob, just turning the volume down every time it gets loud. Which we all kind of do that in the car, like we're listening to Sheck West or something like that. It's about to get loud. It's funny. I listened to him for the first time yesterday because John told me, he said I would love Sheck West,
and he was absolutely right, wasn't he?
Yeah, no, he definitely was.
Yeah, that's right up your alley, man.
Yeah. But yeah, so compression is almost like having someone turn down the volume automatically. It's like having a little studio assistant. Also, what compression does is it also brings up the volume of the quieter parts of the music.
Right.
So you have the attenuation of the peaks, the louder stuff, and then the gain boosting of the lower stuff. The way that happens usually is because when you're turning down the volume, the overall level of your signal gets quieter.
Right.
So let's say you're compressing something and you want to keep it the same level. Most compressors should have a makeup gain parameter or knob. And then because you're doing that, you're limiting the dynamic range, and all of a sudden the quieter things become louder, the louder things become quieter.
Right.
And you have, a more consistent dynamic. So limiting is essentially the same thing, but its uses are pretty different.
Mm-hmm.
So in compression, you have a parameter that's called ratio. And the ratio is pretty much how much attenuation you want. So you've probably seen on a compressor 2-to-1, 4-to-1, 6-to-1, and everything in between. So limiting is usually the higher ratios, like 20-to-1, infinity to 1. And what limiting is used for, it's pretty much just taking the signals that are really high and you're just smashing them down. But the thing is, you usually have a really fast attack time, because with a slow attack time, you'll hear the transient, which is that the initial sound, the initial hit, and then the attenuation. But with good limiting, you want to have a really fast attack so that you don't really hear it limiting or compressing.
Right.
But it's just taking those peaks and it's and it's lowering them and kind of like smashing those peaks. So like a limiter most people are used to using is the Waves L2, which funny enough I've never used an L2.
Really?
But
well, you tend to be more of a hardware guy anyway.
Yeah. And it's funny they make a hardware L2.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought but it's like $3,500, and I was like, nah.
Yeah.
it's a digital piece, so you might as well just get the plug-in.
Right.
You'll get the same thing. But yeah, so those are kind of the uses of compression and limiting. Of course, there's the technical way, which is pretty much what I just explained, and there are the sort of using it as an instrument kind of thing. Like I know like in hip hop, there's a lot of side chain compression or like EDM. I guess maybe you could talk about that because I know you definitely use that more than I do.
Yeah. So, the way that I love to side chain. I used to kind of go a little bit too hard with side chaining. I mean, there's really no right or wrong way in doing it. The problem is one of the things that you can do bad with side chaining is, so I like the way that you broke down compression and limiting, because limiting is more like brick walls, just like it's just not going to get past this volume.
Right.
Or this gain stage. But then compression is more about the dynamics of the track. So unfortunately, you can go too hard at bringing about too much attention to the wrong part of the signal, the wrong frequency. So I know when I first started really getting into side chaining as a producer, that was one of the issues that I ran into. And so it would be like too much over pumping, and then also way too much pump in like the 200, like I would say 75K to about 200 range, which is like basically was like pumping mud into the mix. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
And so it was a bit overbearing, but I had many people that were like, yo, I love this style that you're doing. And I was just like, I would get a bit of fatigue, listening to it, it's just a bit much.
Yeah.
And so now it's gotten to the place where I basically just use it to make sure that my drums are front and center, and it's more of a ducking tool as opposed to making the overall production, pump at a ridiculous rate.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things that I hear in sidechain compression, and one of the guys I know we both love, Stolen Drums. The way his drums are tucked, but the instruments are still ducking behind the drums.
Yep.
It's pretty cool to have drums that maybe aren't like smashing, that would cut through the mix anyway, but they're more of like a quiet kind of drum. But that sidechain compression around the kick drum or around the snare is just making it cut through the mix in such a cool way, Yeah,
it's really an art form, and I think guys like Stolen Drums, myself, we really use compression more as almost as another instrument. It's really, you have your kick and your snare, you have your melodies, synths, samples, and all that stuff, and then compression is like the last instrument that you're adding to your mix, and it can be a bad instrument. You know what I'm saying? It can turn into a soloist when it's not really supposed to be there. You know what I'm saying? But which is what I was doing quite a bit, when I first was trying to get the hang of the technique.
Yeah, I think if you guys really want a sort of clinic on sidechain compression, definitely listen to Vine by Wes Pendleton. That tape is really dope, man. Like and I mean, if you guys want a clinic on sampling in general, it's just really dope. You did some really cool stuff on that one, man.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. I'm looking forward to finishing this new project, man. I've been working on the project kind of like, underneath the surface. You guys have really inspired me to get out here and, to not stop creating, because I was totally fine with just running things,
Yeah.
But between you guys pushing me, and then almost every week there's somebody sending me a DM or tagging me on social media saying, when's the next project coming out, and I think it's just time for me to go ahead and put something out. And it's not to make like a big deal out of anything, but I just still love the craft, man.
Yeah, of course. I do want to talk about some pros and cons of compression.
Oh, this is going to be the part where you're going to get angry hate mail from people telling you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Smythe, there's no right or wrong answer to compression, man. Why are you telling people that?
As long as the music sounds good. I think I'm ready for it, though.
Yeah.
Does Soul Surplus cover my life insurance in case I get death threats?
Soul Surplus is not liable for the things that are expressed on this podcast episode.
That's like the everyday struggle.
Exactly.
So first we'll talk about the pros.
Okay.
So the first pro is actually one of those things that can be abused into it actually being a con. But we'll talk about the positive on this one. So compression really can take a source, and if you don't squash it, it'll give it a nice dynamic range, and it'll actually give a lot of life to the track. Mm-hmm. Maybe one of my favorite uses for this is vocals, and seeing the way, when you mix a pop vocal, the compression just has to be just right. Mm-hmm. And then it just gives so much more, it gives so much definition to each of the frequencies. Like if you compress right, you're not going to have, your high end is not going to be chopped off.
Right.
Or you're not going to be too mid heavy. Mm-hmm. If you get just the right release, the right ratio, that compression can really just take your vocal to another level.
Right.
I also think that bus compression has this sort of effect of making a track sound more professional. Mm-hmm. I think the word that we use most of the time is glue when it comes to bus compression.
Right.
And the key to bus compression is having sort of a slower attack, so you're not crushing the transients. So like a good use, if you guys want to really get a good example of bus compression, probably the more famous bus compressor is like the SSL on the 4000 console. Listen to pretty much any Dr. Dre mix, Right. Listen to any Kendrick mix from Good Kid, Mad City and on. Of course, Ali's using that SSL, the same one that Dre uses.
Right.
And that console has the bus compressor on the output stage. And that thing is just it's so subtle. You don't think about tracks having bus compressors until you find out they do, and then you kind of feel how the track punches. It's really dope, man, when it's used right.
Listen, man, to this day, still one of the greatest mixed hip hop albums ever is The Massacre by 50 Cent. Good Lord.
Yeah.
Oh
man.
My goodness. Like once a year, I just go back and just sit and listen to that, because I just can't understand my brain. Like, don't get me wrong, I totally understand how you can do it, but my brain just can't comprehend like the range that's in that record. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For it to be that punchy, but be also warm, but also crisp at the same time. I still to this day, I don't think I've heard. Even with what Ali's doing, he's basically, in my opinion, he's probably the closest thing to, what Dre was doing and has been doing. But even still, man, there was just something about that era when they were spending millions of dollars on the recording and mastering process. They don't do that anymore. Dudes aren't in $1 million studios anymore. When they record. I mean, some are. But you can definitely tell the difference between something that 50 is doing right now and especially compared to The Massacre. It was just, that was the height of mix. And everything during that era, even the G Unit albums were just impeccable, man.
Marshall Mathers, Chronic 2001. Chronic 2001 is just another, like, it always baffles me how we place such an emphasis on analog gear as being dirty and full of color, which it can be.
Right.
But, you know, and for me, at least, I always associate music today with being very clean.
Right.
But when you listen to those mixes, like that stuff was the Massacre and like Chronic 2001, all that stuff was done on an SSL board.
Mm-hmm.
And to think that you could get a board to sound that clean, like those mixes to me, they're done analog, but they hit harder than, you know, a hip hop mix today.
Yep.
But it's easier to be clean today than what it is back then. It's just crazy to me. That just shows like you got to have a crazy amount of skill to be mixing like that and to get something that clean on a board and have it compare and still match up to music today. Like that's just it's ahead of its time, you know.
Yep.
So the second pro is that it can be used as a tool in the mastering stage to make a track louder.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this sort of goes with what we're talking about with that SSL sound and the bus compression. I know that in my experience, I don't always like to mix with a compressor on the bus, although I want to get used to that. But when you're at the point when you're adding your brick wall limiter as sort of like the last chain in mastering, it always helps when you have a compressed 2-track, because you know you're limiting the dynamics. You know, the bus compressor is not doing like 8 dB of compression. Usually it's just a few,
right.
But that few dB can get you that much louder in the mastering stage,
right,
without having like that nasty distortion from your limiter.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one thing I picked up that you always say, one of the markers of a great mastered track is if you can turn it up in your car without it sounding like a guitar amp. You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's and you know, and the albums right now that you can do that with consistently are all the albums from TDE.
Yep.
I mean, you can crank them things. I've cranked. I think the master volume in my car goes up to, I think like 60 or something like that. Consistently, I have TDE albums up to 50, like all the time, and pretty much anything else I can't get past like 41.
Yeah.
Before it's
Crazy.
like, man, this is way too harsh.
Yeah.
So yeah, shout out to Ali, man. Dude is just mad nice with it.
Yeah. And also Drake's albums.
Oh, absolutely.
I can do that with. So yeah, that's mixing and mastering compression. The last pro is that it can be used to prevent a source from clipping. You know, it's funny enough, this is also something I like to do actually when I'm making the packs. Before I even mix, I'll put like some a tape simulator, and I'll put, again, like we were talking about, that Fairchild. And it's there for the sound, but also I don't have to look at my meter constantly if I know I have a compressor on the bus.
Right.
Especially because, you know, we will have drums on the pack soon, but for the one coming out this week, there's no drums on it. I don't have to worry about the drum transients clipping.
Right.
So when I have the Fairchild, and it's just like, you know, sort of like smoother instruments in there, I know I definitely don't have to worry about those clipping with the Fairchild just knocking that back. So
right.
Because man, clipping while you're mixing, like, you want to pay attention to your meters, but it's also like the last thing I want to be thinking about. I want to be thinking about making the song sound good, and not be thinking about, oh man, I'm at like plus 0.2 is the most annoying thing. Mm-hmm. I hate that so much. It's like, yo, it's such an insignificant amount of volume clipping. It's like just a little bit, but it just bothers me so much. Then I have to shift all of my focus. So yeah, having something on your mix bus can really help with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know as we record these podcasts, like a few of the earlier ones we did, I know you talked about you had to put a compressor on for some of the pops. But I'm using a pop filter now, guys. So no more pops.
Yeah.
No more clicks. One thing I love though for preventing clipping is this Warm Audio WA76. It's a remodel of the 1176, which is a super fast compressor. So I like to set the input pretty low, so I'm not really. It's sort of like a brick wall almost application. I'm not setting the ratio, or the input too high, so that it's only going to catch those peaks and knock it down by like 3 dB.
Right.
But at that point, like, again, it's because I want my focus to be on getting a good performance and not watching the meter and seeing that I'm hitting the red, you know?
Right. So let's hop into these cons.
Yeah.
This is where you're going to get the most hatred right here.
Yeah.
I'm just joking, guys. We're not going to get hate mail for any of this.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
No, but so the first con is that it limits the dynamics of a source. The second con is that it raises the level of background noise. And the third con is that it can make a source sound less exciting. So I'll take the first con. I know the second con is something that you sort of have mixed feelings about.
Yes, very, very, very mixed, but we'll get into it.
Yeah. So the first con is that it limits the dynamics of a source. And that's one of the reasons why you really have to watch the how much you're compressing certain things. So I know certain vocals, like, you know, vocal mixes out here, the compression is just you can hear that they're slamming it.
Right.
And one thing I learned was that when you're mixing a vocal, you still want those vowels, or not vowels, but those consonants that have harder sounds. You still kind of want to feel them. You don't want to take those and just completely like smash them and crush them, because in a sentence, you know, you have your B sounds, your P sounds, and those are the things that can really make a vocal sound like it's in your face. That and you know, there's no one talks completely at the same level. That's just impossible.
Right.
And I'm a very visual guy, so I like to have I don't mix with my eyes, but you know, I do know that I'm doing something right if my vocal tracks are just not rectangles.
Right.
After I mix them.
Exactly.
You know? That and drums, I think, can be over compressed as well. I know we both like to have some dirt on our drums.
Right.
And part of the way you get that dirt, and part of the way you even get the glue, is through compression. But if you're over compressing, then you're gonna lose those transients. You're gonna lose the life of it. You're gonna lose that pop of the snare, especially if you have a higher pitch snare. The way that the snare cracks through the mix is really important, and you can definitely destroy that if you're over compressing.
Right.
So, but let's get into the second con. I'm interested to see what you have to say about this.
Yes. So, and this really just comes down to me coming from a specific era when it comes to sampling. So when I first started sampling, you didn't sample off the internet, because the internet did not exist the way it does today. When I first started sampling, it was going through the collection that I had between my collection, the collection my uncle had given me when he passed away, which was like a ridiculous collection, and, you know, sampling a lot of my parents' old gospel records. I sampled everything on vinyl. And so anytime you're sampling off vinyl, there's all kinds of noise coming through that signal between the needle, the actual recording, you know, depending on what type of equipment that you're using. So obviously, you know, back then I didn't have crazy setup, you know what I'm saying? Had 2 RCA cables, you know what I'm saying, plugged into a mixer, and them Jones was trash. I got them from Radio Shack. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
Shout out to Radio Shack. You know what I'm saying? Rest in peace to Radio Shack. Used to be one of my favorite places to go.
I hated Radio Shack. I really did, but rest in peace.
Yeah. I got accustomed to working in my DAW dirty. You know, because and I like that sound. And it might have been because I grew up listening to vinyl. Grew up listening to vinyl and cassettes. There's so many things that kids today, man, you guys like really missed out, man. I know it's easier to grab a digital device, you know, it's just so much faster, but there was something about like having to actually get up and put some effort into listening to music, and then the fact that it wasn't digital, the sound was just a lot different than it is today. So textures are really, really big for me. A little bit of warble in the mix is very important to me. And so I love when the compressor raises a bit of that background noise, because for my ears, it gives the track that much more presence. And because of the way that I listened to music growing up, that's the thing that makes me feel like a track is more complete when I can actually hear the presence of the track, which in essence is really just background noise. And so you get that now with like tape emulators, and, you know, there's all types of things that you can do now, you know, adding, you know, I mean, you can get a sample pack literally of just noise. I know it is a con in that, you know, there are certain parts of the signal that you don't want raised. But at the same time, like, I know for myself, I actually like that more than I dislike it. And then and I think that you and I don't see eye to eye as much on this, because you're looking at it from a musician's perspective and I'm looking at it from strictly a producer's perspective.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny is that I'm more so, when it comes to background noise, looking at it from an engineer perspective.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Because the noise is just, it doesn't serve any purpose in the recording stage.
Right.
It's because it doesn't do anything. Now adding it later, well then you're using it. It becomes an instrument in the track, and you can manipulate it. But when you're recording a vocal, and you just start hearing this hiss because you have it going through a few compressors, then you start hearing the singer, maybe he or she has bracelets on there.
Right.
And then depending on where you're recording, you know, you hear footsteps around the house. Yeah. And at that point, you're
corduroy
just
collars.
Over it. Exactly.
Yo, there's
Go ahead.
There's this one recording from when I used to be part of this rap group back in the day. This is like well over a decade ago. And my man Eric was recording and it was funny because he recorded like in the closet. They had like a closet booth, and but he was like, he had like keys around his neck, like on a string, and so he was in there like going in, and like on the final mix you could just hear his keys like all over the track, and it's still one of the funniest things for us to talk about today. Bruh. It's like, yo, remember this really this song that was really popular, and like nobody heard the keys but us, but it was mad present in the mix because somebody wasn't paying attention.
Right, man. Yo, stuff. That's the kind of stuff that makes me angry in the studio. Like as an engineer, like I remember there's this one guy. I'll keep him nameless. Hopefully. I mean, I don't care if he's listening to this because he needs to know this. But he did a take and he was snapping
his fingers.
Yeah,
like while he was singing.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
Right. And I'm just like, yo, I think he stopped doing it because I remember. I don't think I probably did say something. I don't remember what I said though, but. Stuff like that, if it's unnecessary, it doesn't have to be in there. I know like some people, some singers, they have to find their groove, and that could help you find your groove.
Right.
And you want to make people as comfortable as they can be. I know we talked about this in our one of our other podcasts about running a session. You want people to be comfortable.
Right.
But if you're doing stuff like that then I have to draw the line there. Don't snap. Don't try not to rustle your shirt. Don't rustle your bracelets. You know, put your keys in the control room.
Right.
But yeah, so this last con is that it can make compression can make a source sound less exciting.
Now this point right here is probably the main issue that I have with the way music is mixed today.
Yeah.
Like I feel like there's a weight, like it's like, guys, you took like all of the essence out the track.
Right. Yeah.
And I even think that there's like a little, I don't want to say it's a conspiracy because that sounds terrible, but I even think that there's like a little bit of a conspiracy. I think this is why people like using electronic drums right now, is because if you use synth drums like 808, you know, first of all, you can tune them. So it just makes the mix, you know, that much easier. But also too, I just feel like that there's always like less life in the mix overall. I mean, don't get me wrong, man. You throw like a husky, funky 808 in the bottom of that mix. Oh, you can feel that mix. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, you know, there's times where I'll hear, you know, Drake will have a funky 808, but there's still presence in the mix. Kendrick will have a dirty 808, you know, J-Rock and those guys, they'll have that in the mix, but the mix still moves, you know, there's still presence to the mix.
Yeah. I mean, if we want to talk about programmed drums with dynamics, I don't think we have to look any further than Prince.
Yeah, bruh.
You know, definitely not the first use of electronic drums, but maybe the most notable. You know, there's actually on our Power Punch drum kit, there's a drum break called Purple Ones. And I modeled the pattern of Beautiful Ones. One of my favorite drum patterns. But anyway, I'm digressing. I'm saying this to say that when you overcompress, first of all, live drums, you overcompress them, then you're compressing like the overheads and the rooms, and that stuff is just completely taking over all of the transients from your direct mics.
Right.
So you're gonna definitely lose life. But when you overcompress your 808s and your kick drums and your snare drum samples and all of that, then you're taking really what electronic drums do best, in my opinion, is that snap and that consistent hit. They're just more consistent than what any human could be.
Right.
You know, except for Clyde Stubblefield, rest in peace, the funky drummer.
Right.
Probably more consistent than a drum machine.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you overcompress those things, then you're pretty much taking all the stuff that you want from electronic drums out of the music. So, you know, there's an album that we've talked about before that we both think was not mixed very well.
Everybody thinks it wasn't mixed well.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's definitely one of the albums that suffered from that, is the overcompression of those elements.
What do you think happened with that album? I'm pretty sure most people are. It's one of the, you know, top 2 selling rap albums this year that actually had to be remixed and put out. Like, what do you think was the issue with that? Was that rushing, or was it just like, do you think that that the producer engineer was trying to push the envelope a bit from like a sonic standpoint? Because there are some sonics in that record that I really, really, really enjoy that I've just never heard really in hip hop. You know what I mean?
Yeah. My first impression was that it was definitely pushing the envelope. It was most definitely a vibe.
Right.
But it just didn't work. But then as you know, one of us pointed out, I think it might have been Elvin, there were some clicks and pops in that album.
Oh, there was a lot of clicks. There was clicks and pops in the first track, bro. Like 20 seconds into the track, it was like, oh, yeah. But I will say this: the remix sounded a lot better.
I didn't hear it. Maybe I am listening. Maybe I'm listening to it. Is it on Spotify?
I don't know. I think they took the original down because that first track, man. I listened to that, like I was really excited to listen to that, and I was actually down at the studio the night that it came out, and you know I live like 40 minutes away from the studio, so I was just like really excited to leave because you know I had the opportunity to basically listen to almost the whole entire album just in the ride home. So you know, that first track came on, and like you said, like the vibe was there, but man, those pops and clicks came out super loud, like and I was just like, wow, they let this go through. So but I again, part of me was wondering, was that done on purpose? You know, because these guys just don't do that. But you know, but then you know, you get later into the album, and then you hear, you know, like just the sonics and dynamics on "The Party Never Ends." Like when that first comes on, you're just like, holy crap, how do you get that to sound like that? That joint is amazing, and it's literally just a solo. It's not even anything. It's those small little things in the album that can make an album classic.
You know, it's one of those things like I don't think that we're going to look back on it and say, wow, that was pretty genius of them.
Right.
Although that definitely is what I get from him, is the use of these elements. You know, we had this conversation a couple of days ago, but like he's pretty much responsible for like the Yeezus sound and pretty much everything after. You know, it's so funny. It's a little bit of a segue with you bringing up that conversation. You and I have everyday struggle like conversations off of the mic, pretty much on a weekly basis. Yeah, but I'm not. You low-key calling me academics, and I'm not academics. You know?
No, but I don't. Yeah, and I don't mean it in that way. What I mean is, there's like more of like an old head perspective, and then a young. What are you? Generation Z? Is that what you guys are called?
Bruh, no. I'm a millennial, man.
Are you a millennial? I thought you were after
24.
millennial.
Nah,
I think you're younger than a millennial.
No, I'm a millennial.
Anyway, yeah. So a millennial and a Generation Xer.
You think I'm 16?
Nah, I just thought that because do you know the age of millennials? Like, I'm like right on the other side of millennial. So like I'm, But anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But there are some days where I think like one of the funnest things to do would be for us to have these conversations for people to actually hear publicly. But I'm afraid of the backlash because, man, if I ever say some of the stuff and vice versa, some of the stuff that you say, it's just we will forever be hated because you can't have an opinion in the year of our Lord 2018. So
preach, man. Because we're of course we're getting off topic, but I think we can both say that we both kind of cross over into each other's like sort of side or way of thinking, because I grew up with all people older than me. Like my brothers are your age.
Exactly. Yep.
So I still got a little yes y'all.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course you are a 21 Savage fan.
Yeah. A very big 21 Savage fan. But that's the thing, like I love the new age. Like I love 21, I love Travis, I love Migos, I love all these dudes. Like, there's some of the newer guys and I'm just like, all right, I'm not getting with this, my guy. But I've never been a hater of like people trying new things, and just the same thing when I was a kid. Like, my parents, I don't think they got what we were listening to.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. So, real quick, I think we should talk about some of our favorite compressors. I know there's one specifically that you use the most.
Yep.
you tell us like what it is and how you use that?
Yeah, so my favorite compressor is by Cytomic. It is called the Glue. And you've talked about the Glue multiple times in this episode. And I mean, that's really what the compressor does. It just takes the best elements of, I specifically use it. I'm not going to say specifically, primarily I use it for drums. And it really just takes the drums and puts it into this nice gumbo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's
a good one. I like that. It is a gumbo.
Yeah. So like when you hear the drums, they almost give off the impression that it's like a kit, like it's a set. You know what I mean? Even though you know me, my drums are coming from like all over the place. But there's something about it. There's like this cohesiveness that comes from using that particular plugin that I just love. And that's really more for drums. And then when I get over to more of like the vocal side, I'm using UA Empirical Labs. I wish I had the hardware version, like Elvin, but
the distressor.
Yeah, the distressor. Yeah, but I don't. I mean, he's the one that introduced me, to that plugin. So, but I'm not really like I'm really not like an engineer like you guys. Like I don't do a lot of mixing. Most of my mixing and compression stuff really comes more from just making beats and just production. So, but yeah, so I use the Empirical Labs distressor, the glue by Cytomic, and then the ultimate Logic compressor. The fellas call me John Stockton because of my love for stock plugins and how I get the most out of stock plugins. But it comes from my background of like, I'd be like, hey Dad, can you take me to get this? And he'd be like, no. If it was like my dad was so cool. Like if I said to my dad, like when I went to art school, I was like, hey Dad, I need a new Mac. And this before everybody used Macs, right? This is like a G4. My first Mac was a G4. And he was like, oh yeah, no problem. He took me out like the day later, spent like $3,000 like it was nothing. And the same thing a couple years later, maybe like 3 years later, when my G4 was getting a bit slow, and then like this is when new internet was taking over with Ethernet and stuff like that. So I just needed a bit more speed. I was doing a lot more heavy media stuff, and then he took me to get a G5, and it was the same thing. But if I ever needed like music equipment, nah, he was just like, yeah, you on your own there, bro.
Yeah. The thing about the Logic compressor, I think this is sort of how I feel about just plug-in compressors in general. Like Logic, when it comes to just straight up compressing and attenuating, like you kind of really don't need anything other than the Logic like stock compressor, because within it's modeling everything. You have like your SSL, though I think it's called VCA, vintage VCA. Mm-hmm. It's like the white one with like the blue, details and everything. Mm-hmm. Or you have like the 1176, I think it's called vintage FET. But you have a bunch of different kind of models in there. And the thing is, they will compress. It's kind of hard to describe. They'll compress just like the things that they're modeling. Like you can compress like the SSL or compress like the 1176 or like an LA2A.
Right.
But everything else is just like completely off. Mm-hmm. Like it's like I know like, on an 1176, when you turn the attack all the way up and the release all the way up, and you get like a really high, a really low threshold, you get this distortion. Now out of the real one, like out of a hardware unit, it sounds really good. It's really cool.
Right. I
think I've talked about it before. It's like the all buttons in mode.
Yeah.
You get like a really, but on the Logic compressor, it just sounds like your signal is farting. Like it's horrible.
Right.
But I think that's what makes it so good for sidechain compression.
Got you.
Because all it's doing, if you just need it to turn down or if you just need to like stop something from peaking, Logic, the stock Logic does that perfectly.
Gotcha. Yeah, I use it mainly to side chain, and it does that like flawlessly.
Yeah, most definitely.
And so it's one of my favorite things to do. So like, you know, Elvin is so good at engineering and, you know, mixing and mastering. He sat and he was like, you got to show me how you use that, because I want to know how to use that, because I want to start to implement that into what I'm doing. So that's one thing I got that you know, that I'm good at. But yeah, those three are pretty much like my go-tos. I use the Empirical Labs one probably the least out of the three. And then use Cytomic the most, and then, you know, the Logic. I probably would say I use the Glue and the Logic compressor probably pretty much the same.
Okay. Yeah, that Logic compressor, I have to check out the Glue, but the Logic, it's just so handy. If you don't have anything else, like I really feel like you could get by, but you know, for me, I actually, as you guys know, I like to do stuff out of the box a little bit more. So I've talked about it a few times. I don't want to, you know, just keep what's the word I'm looking for?
Going back to bringing up old stuff.
So it doesn't start with huh?
Yeah.
So yeah, I've already talked about some of the hardware stuff, so I don't want to go back over it too many times. But you know, when it comes to tracking vocals, I would say if I had to just choose one compressor, I would definitely choose the 76, like I've talked about.
Right.
It's very versatile. It's very fast, but you can get the attack time slow enough where you're not squashing it as much, and you're not hearing the compression as much, but it's still like we talked about, raising the frequencies and the levels of the good stuff that you want to hear.
Right.
When it comes to drums, although this is not technically compression, I actually recently picked up this tape simulator, this analog tape simulator, by this company called Handsome Audio. It's called the Zulu.
Oh yeah, you were telling me about that.
Yeah, man, this thing is really, really, really dope. So the reason why I'm bringing it up is because saturation and compression are two different things, but saturation does, by nature, compress things.
Right.
So like the Power Punch kit, again, with those breaks, I ran all those breaks through the Zulu. It's like a small desktop, passive, analog tape saturator. And man, what it does, it just takes like your drums or even your mix. I've run mixes through it, but in this case with the drums, like you said, it makes it sound like a kit.
Right.
It's really cool. So for drums, I find myself doing that a lot. Yeah, and then for bass, I'm just kind of using the 76 again as a sort of as a brick wall limiter kind of thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like hardware. If I had to choose one software compressor, you know, I actually might just go with the Fairchild, the UAD.
Gotcha.
UAD is really cool. So you know, like we always do at the end of these podcasts or towards the end, we want to give 3 tips for using compression. Just to help you guys out. Maybe if you don't understand it completely or you're having trouble, you know, they should help you out. So the first tip is to gain stage properly. And this is one I had to learn the hard way. Because when you go back and you recall your mixes, maybe you hear like you're compressing, you know, your vocals too much. Mm-hmm. So you want to hear what it sounds like. Well, what did it sound like before I had the compressor on? And there was times where I would take the compressor off and the level would just drop like 10 dB.
Right.
Because louder is better. You know, I say that with quotation marks in my hands. But when you're mixing, you add an effect like a compressor, you turn it up because it feels like, oh, well, this sounds better now because it's louder. But what you're doing is you're just raising the level of what's going on in your track, and you're raising the overall level, so you're clipping.
Right.
And again, we talked about having a compressor on your mix bus. When you don't gain stage properly, you're hitting that mix bus way too hard.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're getting more attenuation than what you want. Or if you don't gain stage properly, maybe you're not getting louder, but when you take the compressor off, it gets maybe the way you're gain staging, things get louder when you take the compressor off.
Right.
Because you didn't apply your makeup gain properly.
Right.
So yeah, it's a huge rabbit hole.
Right.
So the second tip is to listen objectively, but trust your gut. Know when too much compression is squashing the source, but if it sounds good, then go with it. I know this is sort of more of your way of thinking when it comes to compression overall because of the way that you use it.
Right.
Has there been times when you really questioned, like, this sounds like too much, but it also sounds good,
Yeah, I mean, the longer that I do this, the less that there's very, how your ear just gets a little bit more attuned to like what the right thing to do is over time.
Yeah.
And so now it's more like if I hear something and if my brain is questioning where it's at, I literally will go and then look at the level and the level will tell me this is too loud, bro. You know what I'm saying? And so while it might not sound good right there in that, right there in that space, when you then are able to take that mix and listen to it on a myriad of different speakers and you hear, it's just like, okay, yeah, I'm definitely glad that I didn't trust my gut in that situation. and I actually went to science, but then there are some times when you're just, it's more about you being experimental and it's more about the groove and you don't care, One of the best examples of that is, I think it was on Voodoo. There's a song called The Root.
Mm-hmm.
The snare on that track is mad loud. It's very loud and would be, in my opinion, what somebody would consider probably it's not in the pocket.
Mm-hmm.
But for that track, it's perfect. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that like, obviously, these are like some of the greatest engineers to ever work on music, worked on that album. But the way that they place that snare in that mix, scientifically, or I mean, from our brain standpoint, it would kind of come to you as like, the snare seems like it's kind of loud. When in all actuality, it's just placed just perfectly in the mix, and that signal is just cutting through as perfect as it can be.
Yeah, it's funny how monitoring has so much to do with these decisions.
Right.
I really think that maybe even if your room is not treated, which that's also something that we wrote an article about, acoustically treating your room. So you guys should check that out. That stuff affects your decisions, but sometimes I find that it affects my decisions in a good way. Particularly, I know for me, when it comes to mid-range, again, I'll listen to other tracks and sometimes it sounds like there's like a little bit of a mid-range scoop. Mm-hmm. Where I just kind of like a beefier mid-range. Like I usually like to keep things pretty full around like the 1K, 2K area.
Right.
But anyway, that monitoring definitely affects those decisions, like those gut decisions. Maybe you feel things coming out of your speakers a different way, and your gut's telling you this is a good thing, and that's a part of creating your sound as well. Right. So our last tip is don't compress for the sake of compression.
Right.
And this might even be a hate mail worthy one.
All the way at the end.
Yeah. Gotta save it for the end. I'm always of the mindset, if I don't have to do something, I'm not gonna do it. If I could get away, but this is part of the reason why I like using analog gear. If I can do a session and all I have on my tracks are just like little EQ cuts, or like maybe just a few dB of compression on a couple tracks, then I'm good with that. Like I don't want to be doing things just because, like, Mixed by Ali says he uses, so and so compressor on every track, or Chris Lord Algae uses this, he uses LA2A,
Right.
Dude, what's the point? You gotta have a reason for everything you do, especially compression, because again, that kind of stuff can destroy your mix.
Yep. This was a great episode, man.
Yeah,
definitely a good episode coming back from the summer vacation, and we appreciate you guys checking in and listening for the whole session. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We are found on iTunes as well as Android. We are also on SoundCloud, as well as we post all of our episodes via our YouTube channel, which is really growing substantially. And so one of the things that we're looking forward to, Smythe and I have already talked about, when we move into our new space, we're possibly actually going to do a video recording of the podcast as well, which should be pretty cool. But we appreciate you guys checking in. We're really excited about some of the guests that we have lined up for a few of these newer episodes. We've got some pretty great producers and artists that are going to be sharing the stage with us, so to say, man. And Smythe, appreciate all of your wisdom in this episode, and we definitely,
of course, man.
Definitely look forward to catching you guys on the next one. So until then, we'll talk to you. Peace.